The first thing I saw when I came home from my final army assignment wasn't my father's porch light. It was a sold sign. My younger brother Caleb was standing beneath it, smiling like he'd been waiting for me. "It's done, Alara," he said. "Dad left the house to me." I looked at the paperwork in his hand. Then I saw the signature. My father's name was written across the bottom. There was only one problem. That document was dated 11 days after my father was buried. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply asked Caleb one question. "Who told you I wouldn't check the records?" He laughed. He had no idea that 22 years in the military had taught me something far more valuable than how to follow orders, how to find the missing piece. And 3 days later, when the man who bought my father's property discovered what was hidden beneath that house, he called the police before calling my brother. The day we buried my father, my brother told me I had inherited nothing. He didn't wait until we reached the reception. He didn't even wait until everyone had left the cemetery. We were standing beside my father's grave when Grant turned toward me, adjusted the sleeve of his black suit, and said, "Dad left everything to me." I stared at him. "What did you say?" "The house, the company, his accounts. Everything." Around us, our relatives suddenly became very quiet. My aunt looked at the ground. My cousin pretended to check his phone. Nobody seemed surprised. That was when I understood. Grant hadn't come to mourn our father. He had come to announce that he had won. I looked at the leather folder tucked beneath his arm. "Where's the will?" "Already handled." "By whom?" "Our attorney." "What attorney?" Grant sighed. "Serafina, don't do this today." I had heard that tone before. It was the tone Grant used whenever he wanted everyone to believe I was the difficult one. I had spent 22 years in the Army. Deployments had taught me patience. Intelligence assignments had taught me to notice what people didn't say. And Grant had just said too much. "Dad was my father, too," I said. "He knew what he wanted." "Then I'll see the document." "You'll get a copy." "When?" "Soon." He walked away. I watched him disappear between the cars. Something wasn't right. My father had never hidden important decisions from me, especially not decisions involving the farmhouse he'd lived in for 40 years or the company he'd built from nothing. I drove there alone. The house was exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks earlier. Dad's truck sat beneath the carport. His work boots were beside the back door. His reading glasses were still lying on the kitchen table. For several minutes, I simply stood there. Then I sat in his chair. That was when the grief finally broke through. I cried. Not because Grant had claimed everything. Not because I was afraid of losing money. I cried because my father was gone. When I finally wiped my eyes, I noticed something strange. The door to Dad's study was locked. He never locked that door. I searched the kitchen drawers for the spare key. Nothing. I checked his desk. Nothing. Then I remembered something he told me years ago. If you ever need something important, don't search where I keep it. Search where nobody thinks I'd hide it. I searched beneath the grandfather clock. Nothing. Behind the bookshelves. Nothing. Under his desk, however, I found a small wooden panel that looked slightly different from the rest. I pressed it. It opened. Inside was a brass key, no label, no explanation. I held it in my palm and immediately thought of the old Footlocker in the garage. I'd seen that box my entire childhood. It was military green, scratched along the edges, with a heavy brass lock. When I was 12, I'd once asked Dad what was inside. He smiled and said, "Things that belonged to a different life." I found it beneath the workbench. Dust covered the lid. I inserted the key. The lock opened. Inside were old photographs, military papers, medals, letters, and a sealed envelope. My name was written across it, Serafina Cole. My hands went cold. I opened the envelope. There was only one sheet of paper, my father's handwriting. I read the first line. "If Grant tells you I left everything to him, don't believe him." I stopped breathing. The next line was worse. The will he shows you is not the will I signed. I read it again. Then again, beneath those words was one final sentence. What Grant really wants is not the company. I stared at the page. Then I heard tires crunching over the gravel outside. I quickly folded the letter and stepped toward the garage window. A black SUV had stopped across the road. Someone was sitting inside, watching the house. I couldn't see the driver's face. Then my phone rang. Grant, I answered. Where are you? At Dad's house. His voice immediately changed. You need to leave. Why? Because there's nothing there for you. I looked at the open Footlocker. Funny. What? Dad seems to disagree. Silence. Then Grant said something that made every instinct in me wake up. Serafina, whatever you found in that Footlocker, don't take it to court. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. He knew about the Footlocker. He knew I'd found something, and more importantly, he was afraid of what was inside. I looked down at my father's letter. For 22 years, the Army had taught me one simple rule. When someone tells you not to look somewhere, that's exactly where you look. I closed the Footlocker. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight my brother with accusations. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't even going to tell him what I'd found. I was going to find out exactly what my father had left behind. And if Grant had lied about the will, I was going to make him prove it in court. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my father's kitchen table with his letter in front of me and one question repeating in my head. If Grant wasn't telling the truth, why was he so confident? At 6:30 the next morning, I called the county probate office. I gave them my father's name and asked whether an estate filing had already been submitted. The clerk checked. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. Yes. A will was filed 2 days ago. 2 days ago? Yes. My father died 6 days ago. I understand. Can I get a copy? After verifying my identity, she emailed the document. I opened it. The first page looked ordinary. The second page listed Grant as executor. The third page listed the assets, the farmhouse, the company, investment accounts, several pieces of property. Everything went to Grant. Everything. Except for one small savings account left to me. $12,400. I stared at the screen. Then I opened the final page. There was my father's signature. I knew that signature. I'd watched him sign birthday cards, business contracts, checks, and Christmas presents my entire life. But this wasn't right. Dad's hands had been shaking during his final months. His recent signatures were uneven. This one was perfectly smooth. Too perfect. I called Mara Voss, an attorney I'd met through a veterans legal assistance program. I sent her the document. She called me less than 10 minutes later. Serafina, where did this come from? The probate office. Did your father ever show you this? No? Then don't confront your brother. Why? Because if this is forged, we need evidence before Grant realizes you know. I looked toward the garage. I may already have some. What did you find? My father left me a letter. What does it say? That the will Grant submitted isn't the will he signed. Mara went quiet. Then she asked, did he leave you anything else? A Footlocker. What was inside? Old military documents, photographs, letters. Anything related to the estate? I don't know yet. Don't touch anything else until I get here. She arrived that afternoon. I showed her the Footlocker. She examined every document carefully. Then she stopped. One photograph showed my father standing beside a younger man. Who is this? I don't know. Mara turned the photograph over. There was handwriting on the back. He knows why they're coming for the property. She looked at me. What property? My father owns land behind the factory. How much? About 70 acres. Mara opened her laptop. Within minutes, she had pulled up the county property records. Then her expression changed. Serafina, what? Your father's land was recently involved in a development application. I moved closer. The applicant was a company called Redstone Holdings. The proposed project covered nearly the entire parcel. I frowned. Dad never agreed to sell? Mara clicked another document. The application was submitted 3 months ago. 3 months? Yes. My father was alive then, very much alive, and according to the document, he had supposedly authorized negotiations. I checked the signature. It was the same strange copy appearing on the will. My father's signature had been used again. Mara looked at me. Someone has been using your father's identity. Who? We need to find out. I pulled the letter from my pocket. My father's warnings suddenly made sense. What Grant really wants is not the company. He wanted the land. But why? Mara searched Redstone Holdings. Its largest investor was a private development group. Then she found something else. Grant's name appeared in the company's records, not as an owner, as a consultant. I felt something inside me go cold. My brother had been connected to the developer before Dad died. I called Grant. He answered immediately. What do you want? Did you know Redstone Holdings was trying to buy Dad's land? Silence. Then, you've been looking through things that don't concern you. So that's a yes. Serafina, you're grieving. You're making connections that aren't there. Then explain why your name appears in their corporate records. He didn't answer. I asked, did Dad agree to sell? He was considering it. No, he wasn't. You weren't here. I was his daughter. And I was the one running his company while you were overseas. There was bitterness in his voice. Then he said something I'll never forget. Dad knew you wouldn't understand what he was doing. I stared at the phone. Maybe. I paused. But you just admitted he was doing something. He hung up. Mara was listening. She looked at me. That's useful. Why? Because he just contradicted the will. How? Because the will says your father had already decided everything belonged to Grant, but your brother says your father was still negotiating the property. I looked at the documents again. The timeline wasn't making sense. Then I noticed the date on the development application. It had been submitted 11 days after my father entered the hospital. My father couldn't have signed it. I asked Mara to investigate who physically submitted the documents. She made a few calls. Then she looked at me. The application was delivered by a man named Daniel Mercer. The name stopped me. I looked at the photograph from the Footlocker. The man standing beside my father. It was him, Daniel Mercer. Mara searched his background. He wasn't just a property consultant. He had once worked for my father's company, and 3 months earlier, he had received a payment of $75,000 from a company connected to Grant. My pulse quickened. Why would Grant pay him? Mara shook her head. We don't know. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a photograph. It showed my father in his hospital room, taken through the half-open doorway. The timestamp was visible, 11:31 p.m. Under the photograph were 6 words. Your brother wasn't alone that night. I stared at the screen. Mara leaned closer. Serafina. I looked at her. We need to find out who took that picture, because suddenly, the forged will wasn't the biggest mystery anymore. Someone had been inside my father's hospital room the night he died. The photograph wouldn't leave my mind. My father lying in a hospital bed. The timestamp, 11:31 p.m. And the message beneath it, your brother wasn't alone that night. Mara enlarged the photograph on her laptop. The image was grainy, but the doorway was visible. So was Grant. He stood beside my father's bed, and behind him was another figure, a man. I leaned closer. "That's Daniel Mercer," Mara nodded. "The same man who submitted the property documents. And the same man from Dad's Footlocker." We needed to know what happened inside that room. The hospital still had security records from the night my father died. Getting them wasn't easy, but Mara's legal request gave us access to the relevant footage. We watched it frame by frame. At 11:27 p.m., Grant entered the ICU hallway. 4 minutes later, Daniel appeared. They entered my father's room together. At 11:42, someone left. It was Daniel. He carried a black leather case. I immediately recognized it. My father's document case. Mara paused the footage. "Are you certain? I've seen it since I was a child." We continued watching. At 11:46, Grant left. He stopped in the hallway and made a phone call. The audio was barely audible, but one sentence came through clearly. "She wasn't supposed to come home yet." I felt a chill. He was talking about me. I had originally been scheduled to remain overseas for another month. I had returned early because my father had personally asked my commanding officer to let me come home. At the time, I thought Dad simply wanted to see me. Now I wondered whether he'd known he was in danger. Mara replayed the footage. "There's something else." She pointed toward Grant's hand. He was holding a small envelope. Where did that come from? I didn't know, but I knew where we could look. My father's office. We returned to the farmhouse and searched every drawer. Nothing. Then I remembered the letter. What Grant really wants is not the company. I searched the property documents again. The development application, the land survey, the old restriction. Then I found a name appearing repeatedly in the records. Thomas Reed. My father's accountant 29 years earlier. The man in the photograph. I searched the company's archived files. Thomas Reed had disappeared from the company's records shortly after the original property agreement was created. No death certificate, no retirement record, no explanation. He had simply vanished. Mara searched public records. Then she stopped. "He's alive." I looked at her. "Where?" "Another state." We called the number listed in the record. No answer. We left a message. 30 minutes later, the phone rang. An older man's voice answered. "Who is this?" "This is Serafina Cole." Silence. Then, "Your father finally sent you." My heart jumped. "You knew he was going to contact me?" "You knew he hoped you would come home." "What happened to him?" Another pause. "Your father discovered what Grant was doing." "What was he doing?" "He wasn't stealing the company." I looked at Mara. "He was stealing the land." I closed my eyes. "Why?" "Because your grandfather placed a restriction on it." "What kind?" "No commercial development without the approval of both family branches." "But my uncle died years ago." "His rights passed to his daughter." I remembered the will. One of its witnesses was Evelyn Shaw, my father's cousin. Thomas continued. "Grant needed that restriction removed." "How?" "He tried to convince your father to sign, and Dad refused." "Yes." "What happened after that?" Thomas's voice became quieter. "Your father started collecting evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Forgery, financial transfers, pressure on witnesses." My hands tightened around the phone. "Thomas, did Grant hurt my father?" "I don't know." That answer frightened me more than a yes. "But I know your father was afraid." "Why?" "Because he called me 2 nights before he died." "What did he say?" "He told me he had hidden the original documents somewhere Grant couldn't find them." "The Footlocker?" "No." I looked at Mara. "Then where?" Thomas hesitated. "Your father told me there was one place Grant would never search." "What place?" "The house." I frowned. He meant inside the house? "Yes." "Where?" "I don't know." Thomas's voice suddenly became tense. "Serafina, listen to me carefully." "I am." "Do not trust Daniel Mercer." "Why?" "Because Mercer didn't disappear with the company records." My stomach tightened. "He disappeared with something else." "What?" "The original property ledger."
The call ended. I stared at my phone. Mara immediately asked, "What did he say?" I told her. She began searching the county records again. Then she found a payment. Daniel Mercer had received $75,000 from Grant 6 months earlier. There was another payment, $50,000, then another, $40,000, all routed through different companies, all ultimately connected to Grant. Mercer wasn't simply helping him, he was being paid. We searched his current address. The house was empty. A neighbor told us Mercer had left the previous evening. She was scared, she said. Did he say where he was going? No. Did anyone visit him? She thought for a moment. Yes. Who? A man in a black SUV. I already knew the answer. Grant. When we returned to the farmhouse, I went straight to the Footlocker. I removed every document. Then I lifted the lining. Nothing. I checked the bottom. Still nothing. Finally, I noticed a tiny metal plate beneath the fabric. There was a keyhole. I tried the brass key from the hidden compartment. Click. The plate opened. Inside was a small digital recorder, and beneath it, another note from my father. The man they believe disappeared is the only man who can prove I was telling the truth. I pressed the recorder. My father's voice filled the garage. If you're hearing this, Grant has already told you that everything belongs to him. I froze. He will show you documents. A pause. Don't believe them. My eyes filled with tears. Then Dad said the words that changed the entire case. The original agreement is not in my house. The recording ended. Mara looked at me. Then where is it? I stared at the photograph of Thomas Reed. For the first time, I understood. My father hadn't hidden the truth from me. He had hidden it from Grant. And now we had to find the one person who knew where it was before my brother found him first. The next morning, Mara received a call from an unknown number. She answered. Her expression changed almost immediately. Then she handed me the phone. A woman's voice whispered, "Are you Serafina?" "Yes." "My name is Evelyn Shaw." I sat upright. The same Evelyn Shaw whose name appeared on Grant's will as a witness. "Where are you?" "St. Matthew's Church, basement entrance." "Why?" "Because your father asked me to tell you the truth if he died." The line went silent. Then she added, "Come quickly, before Grant finds me." We drove to the church. Evelyn was waiting in a dark coat, clutching a folder against her chest. She looked terrified. The moment she saw me, she said, "Your father was right about your brother." "What did Grant do?" She glanced toward the stairs. "Everything." We sat around an old wooden table. Mara placed a recorder on the table. "Start from the beginning." Evelyn took a breath. "Grant came to me 6 weeks before your father died." "Why?" "He wanted me to sign documents confirming that the property restriction had been removed." "Was it?" "No." "Then why sign them?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because he threatened my son." I felt my jaw tighten. "What kind of threat?" "He had someone follow him, photograph him. He knew where he worked, where he lived, even where his children went to school." Mara asked, "Did Grant personally threaten you?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That if I didn't cooperate, my son would lose his job and his family would be destroyed." I looked at the folder. "What documents did you sign?" "The amended property agreement." "Was Daniel Mercer involved?" "Yes." "How?" "He prepared everything." "Who told him what to write?" Evelyn looked at me. "Grant." My heart sank. "Did my father know?" "He discovered it." "When?" "About 3 weeks before he died." "What did he do?" "He confronted Grant." "What happened?" "They had a terrible argument." Evelyn lowered her voice. "Your father told him he would expose everything." "And Grant?" "He said nobody would believe an old man whose health was failing." The words hurt, because I could hear Grant saying them. "What happened next?" "Your father started collecting evidence." "Where?" "I don't know." "Did he tell you?" "He told me one thing." "What?" He said, "If Serafina comes home, tell her to trust the documents, not the people." I looked down. That sounded exactly like Dad. He had always trusted evidence more than promises. Mara opened the folder. "What's this?" Evelyn pushed it toward her. Inside were photographs. Grant entering the hospital, Daniel Mercer leaving after him, and one photograph of Grant holding my father's document case. I stared at it. That was the night Dad died. Yes. Where did you get these? Daniel gave them to me. Why? He became frightened. Mara looked up. Where is Daniel now? I don't know. Did you speak to him recently? Yesterday. What did he say? He told me Grant knew I was talking to you. Suddenly, footsteps echoed upstairs. Evelyn froze. Mara immediately closed the folder. Someone was walking down the staircase, slowly, one step at a time. I looked toward the exit. The basement had another door leading into an alley. Move, Mara whispered. We grabbed the folder and slipped through the rear exit. The moment we reached the alley, a black SUV sped past the church. I didn't need to see the driver. I knew. Grant had found us. We drove directly to Mara's office. There, we examined every photograph Evelyn had brought. One showed Grant carrying my father's document case. Another showed Daniel Mercer leaving the hospital. But the third photograph was the important one. Grant was standing beside a filing cabinet in Dad's office. The timestamp was 2 days before my father's death. Mara zoomed in. What is he holding? I stared. A small metal key. My father's hidden key. The same key that had opened the Footlocker. But Grant hadn't found it. My father had hidden it afterward. Mara looked at me. Your father must have moved the evidence after Grant searched the office. I remembered the secret compartment. Then something clicked. Dad had once told me that the safest hiding place wasn't always the strongest lock. Sometimes it was the place nobody knew existed. I thought about the Footlocker, the digital recorder, the note. The original agreement is not in my house. Then I remembered something else. A phrase Dad used whenever we traveled. Always keep the original somewhere you can reach, but nobody thinks to look. I suddenly knew where. The old military storage facility. My father had rented a private storage unit there for more than 30 years. We drove there immediately. The manager checked the records. Unit 214. Still active, still paid for. The lock was old. I opened it. Inside were boxes of photographs, military uniforms, business files, and old family documents. At the very back sat a metal document tube. Mara opened it. Inside was a rolled property survey. We spread it across the floor. It was the original 1978 property agreement. The missing page was still attached, and underneath it was something else. A handwritten statement from my father. Grant will claim I gave him everything. He is lying. Mara stared at it, but the final line made both of us silent. If this reaches court, ask the judge to open the Footlocker in front of my son. I looked at Mara. Why? She shook her head. I don't know. Then my phone rang. Grant. I answered. His voice was unusually calm. You found it. I didn't respond. The original agreement. How do you know? Because Dad always thought he was smarter than everyone else. Where are you? Preparing for court. He paused, then said, You think that document will save you? I looked at the original agreement lying on the table. No. I smiled. It won't have to. What does that mean? It means Dad left more than one piece of evidence. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then Grant whispered, You don't know what's in that Footlocker. I looked at Mara. Now I understood. Neither did I. Not completely. Because Dad's final instruction hadn't been to hide the evidence, it had been to make sure the judge opened the Footlocker, and whatever he had placed inside it, he had intended for the judge to see it.
The courtroom was silent when Grant walked in. He looked confident, almost relaxed. His attorney carried the will, Mara carried the original property agreement, and I carried the one thing nobody else knew about, the footlocker. The judge looked at me. "Miss Cole, why have you brought that?" I looked at the old military green box. Because my father specifically instructed that it be opened in court. Grant immediately stood. "Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." Grant sat. Mara presented the original property agreement first. The missing page was still attached. The judge examined it carefully. This document clearly requires approval from both family branches before the property can be transferred. Grant's attorney objected. He claimed the document was outdated. Mara countered with county records showing the restriction had never legally been removed. Then Evelyn testified. She admitted she had signed the false amendment under pressure. She identified Grant and Daniel Mercer as the people who prepared it. Grant's expression hardened. "You're lying." Evelyn looked directly at him. "I lied for you once." She paused. "I won't lie again." Then Daniel Mercer entered the courtroom. He had finally agreed to testify. He admitted helping create the false documents. He admitted copying my father's signature. And he admitted Grant had paid him. But the judge asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did Mr. Cole know the documents were fraudulent? Daniel looked toward my brother. Yes. Grant's face went pale. The judge turned toward me and the footlocker. Mara placed it on the evidence table. The judge ordered it opened. I stepped forward. Inside were the same old photographs and military documents I'd found before, but beneath the lining was the hidden compartment. I removed the digital recorder. The courtroom became completely silent. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Grant has probably told you that I left everything to him. Grant lowered his head. My father's voice continued. He is lying. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Then Dad explained the property scheme. He named Grant. He named Daniel. He described the forged documents. And finally he said, I don't know whether my son will ever admit what he has done, but I know my daughter will find the truth. I couldn't hold back my tears. The judge listened to the entire recording. Then she looked at Grant. Mr. Cole, do you have an explanation? He had none. The court ruled that the submitted will was invalid pending further investigation. The forged property documents were referred to prosecutors. The original agreement remained legally binding. Grant's control over the estate was suspended, and the farmhouse and protected land could not be transferred without proper legal approval. As officers approached Grant, he looked at me. You think Dad chose you over me? I shook my head. No. I looked at the footlocker. He chose the truth. Grant was taken from the courtroom. Weeks later, I returned to my father's house. His chair was still beside the window. His boots were still near the door. But something felt different. The house no longer felt like a place I'd lost. It felt like something I'd been trusted to protect. I opened the footlocker one last time. At the very bottom was a small handwritten note I'd never noticed. It contained only one sentence. A family isn't protected by the person who inherits the most. It's protected by the person who refuses to let the truth be buried. I folded the note and placed it inside my father's old service jacket. Then I closed the footlocker. Grant had thought my father left everything to him. He was wrong. My father had left me something far more valuable than the company or the land. He had left me the truth. And unlike money, property, or a forged signature, the truth couldn't be inherited by the wrong person.